Imagine being in a hospital where the people sworn to save lives take them instead. Niels Högel, once a trusted nurse, turned the very place of healing into a stage for his unspeakable crimes. He's believed to be one of the deadliest serial killers in Germany's history, killing at least 100 patients under his care. How did a man devoted to saving lives turn into a murderer? In this video, we unravel the haunting story of Niels Högel, from his childhood to the first crimes that shocked a nation. Early life of Niels Högel. Niels Högel was born in Wilhelmshaven, West Germany, in 1976, into a seemingly ordinary working-class family. His father was a nurse, and it seemed natural that Högel would follow in his father's footsteps. As a child, Högel exhibited a quiet demeanor, but he was often overshadowed by a need for attention. This would later manifest in more dangerous ways. Throughout his schooling, Högel struggled to stand out, but was always cooperative with teachers and peers. Those around him described him as introverted, and despite a relatively uneventful childhood, cracks in his personality began to show. He craved validation, often trying to impress those around him by acting as if he was always in control. After graduating, he entered nursing school, following the career path of his father. No one could have predicted that this would be the start of something dark. By the late 1990s, Högel had finished his training and landed a job at Oldenburg Clinic, a hospital in northern Germany. He was proud of his profession, often boasting to colleagues about his skills in reviving patients. However, behind the mask of professionalism, a sinister obsession was developing, one that would lead to unspeakable tragedy. First, crime and a world event. Högel's first known crime took place in 2000, just as the world was moving on from the Y2K panic and adjusting to the digital age. This was a time of global optimism, where technology seemed to promise a brighter future. Yet, within the walls of Oldenburg Clinic, something far darker was unfolding. One of his early victims was a 63-year-old male patient who had been admitted for routine surgery. Högel injected a drug that would induce a cardiac arrest, knowing full well the man's heart would stop. When the patient's heart failed, Högel would rush in, appearing to heroically resuscitate the patient. Unfortunately, his attempt failed, intentionally or not, and the man died. Högel's reasoning: he sought the thrill of being the one to save someone's life, even if it meant pushing them to the brink of death in the first place. The hospital staff and family were none the wiser. Deaths were not uncommon in a hospital setting, and no one suspected foul play. To them, Högel had simply tried his best in an emergency, but this would only be the beginning. The murders continue, a case of addiction. After his first successful experiment, Högel's desire to manipulate life and death grew. Over the next few years, his methods became more calculated. He would select patients, often the elderly or those in critical care, inject them with drugs that induced heart failure, then swoop in at the last moment, pretending to save them. One case that stood out was a 78-year-old woman, admitted with complications after surgery. By 2003, Högel had moved to Delmenhorst Hospital, and his pattern continued. In this case, Högel administered a lethal dose of a heart medication, causing her to go into cardiac arrest. As usual, he would later claim that he tried to save her life, but the truth was more chilling. Högel had become addicted to the power he held over life and death. He didn't just want to save patients, he wanted to be the one who decided whether they lived or died. After her death, the same sequence of events played out. A failed resuscitation attempt, no suspicion, no investigation. His colleagues trusted him. In a profession built on trust and care, no one suspected the nurse standing next to them could be capable of such atrocities. By 2002, rumors about Högel's high patient death rate were circulating among his colleagues at Oldenburg. A few nurses even joked that patients were in danger whenever Högel was on shift. While these comments started as seemingly light-hearted banter, they were rooted in disturbing observations. Staff members began noticing that patients under Högel's care were more likely to suffer sudden, unexpected complications, cardiac arrests, respiratory failures, and other life-threatening issues. In many of these cases, Högel was the first to respond, claiming he had acted quickly to save the patient's life. But there was a dark pattern that authorities failed to notice. The very patients Högel rescued were the ones he had sabotaged in the first place. Despite the suspicions, Högel remained in his position at Oldenburg until 2002. It wasn't until he moved to Delmenhorst Hospital that the consequences of his actions would catch up with him. A fatal pattern emerges. At Delmenhorst Hospital, Högel's methods became even more reckless. Between 2003 and 2005, Högel's killing spree reached a fever pitch. His colleagues began to raise concerns about his conduct, but these warnings were either ignored or dismissed. The hospital was understaffed and overworked, like many healthcare facilities across Europe at the time, and management was reluctant to believe that one of their own could be responsible for so much death. Högel's confidence grew as he continued to manipulate patients' conditions to trigger medical emergencies. His favorite method involved the use of ajmaline, a medication intended to treat heart arrhythmias. In high doses, ajmaline would cause the heart to fail, and in many cases, Högel would pretend to resuscitate his victims just to fail deliberately. The control he wielded over life and death became an obsession, and he showed no signs of stopping. The incident that exposed the truth. By 2005, Högel's arrogance became his downfall. A fellow nurse at Delmenhorst Hospital witnessed Högel administering an unauthorized drug to a patient who was not in need of it. The patient, a middle-aged man recovering from surgery, suffered a sudden cardiac arrest shortly after the injection. The colleague's suspicion turned into alarm, and Högel was immediately reported to hospital authorities. This was the beginning of the investigation that would expose Högel as one of the most prolific serial killers in German history. The patient survived the incident, but his near-death experience was enough to trigger an inquiry. It didn't take long for investigators to connect Högel's presence to an unusually high number of deaths at both Oldenburg and Delmenhorst hospitals. The arrest and confession. Niels Högel was arrested later in 2005, initially charged with attempted murder. But what started as a local investigation quickly expanded into one of Germany's most high-profile criminal cases. After his arrest, Högel confessed to tampering with patients' medications, but his full confession wouldn't come until years later. Investigators painstakingly reviewed thousands of medical records, exhumed bodies, and cross-referenced shifts. Högel had worked to estimate the true number of victims. In 2015, Högel was convicted of 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder, though this would only scratch the surface of his crimes. Over the next few years, additional evidence came to light, and by 2019, Högel was convicted of murdering at least 85 patients, with estimates suggesting he could have killed as many as 300 people during his career. Niels Högel's case is a chilling reminder of the trust we place in healthcare professionals and how that trust can be betrayed in the most horrifying ways. How did someone so deeply involved in saving lives become responsible for taking them? If you found this deep dive into the dark story of Niels Högel intriguing, be sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime content. Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. What could have been done to stop him earlier? And how do you think hospitals should handle suspicions of misconduct like this in the future? Hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest uploads. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes the people we trust the most can hide the darkest secrets.